I didn't lose my job because I was bad at it. I lost it because I backed the wrong person in a hiring meeting. And I didn't realize it was a political test until the door started closing in slow motion. 5 years later, I sat in a glass conference room, watching the same executives stand up straighter than I'd ever seen them stand for me, because the man walking in was their new boss. And he looked at me like he remembered everything. I need to tell this from the beginning, because when people hear karma, they picture fireworks. What happened was quieter and worse because it was real. I was 32, a mid-level manager at a tech services firm called Larkwell Solutions. Not a startup, not a giant. One of those digital transformation shops that sells polished decks to cautious clients. We had an open office, a people-first mission statement on every wall, and leaders who talked about integrity, the same way they talked about quarterly targets. I ran implementation, 8 people. My job was keeping projects moving and clients calm. The kind of work where you don't get credit for things going right, but you get blamed when anything goes wrong. My boss, Donna, was director of operations, sharp, polished, always so busy, always in meetings you weren't invited to. She liked me because I made her life easier. I thought that meant I was safe. Then we landed a huge contract, and Dana decided we needed a new lead. Someone senior enough to face the client and steady enough to handle the mess that comes when timelines are fantasy. We interviewed 3 candidates, 2 internal, 1 external. The internal favorite was Bryce. Nice suits, perfect hair, the kind of handshake that lasts a second too long. Dana never said, "I want Bryce." She said things like, "Bryce understands our culture, and we need someone who aligns with leadership." The external candidate was Marcus Lane. He came recommended by a departing client. 10 years of experience, calm presence, actual outcomes. In the interview, he didn't perform. He listened, asked uncomfortable but practical questions, then answered directly. When I asked how he handles a project that's behind before it starts, he said, "I tell the truth early. People get angry for a day, then grateful for months. If you wait, they get angry for a year." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the first honest sentence I'd heard in a corporate interview in years. Afterward, Dana scheduled what she called a calibration meeting. Me, Dana, HR, and 2 VPs, who barely knew my team, existed unless something broke. Printed resumes on the table like we were deciding the fate of a kingdom. Dana opened with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Okay, let's align." Bryce's resume went first. Dana praised his executive presence. 1 VP nodded at the word presence like it was a deliverable. HR mentioned Bryce had grown internally. Everyone spoke in that smooth rhythm people use when the decision is already made. Then I said, "Can we talk about Marcus?" The room shifted. Subtle, but I felt it. I said Marcus was the only one who asked the right questions, that he dealt with the exact kind of client pressure we were walking into, that he didn't sell confidence, he sold competence. And if we were serious about delivering, we should hire the person who could do the job, not the person who looked best doing it. I expected debate. What I got was silence. Finally, 1 VP, Gary, tapped his pen and said, "He's not our type." Not our type. Dana jumped in fast. "He's qualified," she said. "But we need someone who fits how we operate." "How we operate?" I repeated before I could stop myself. Dana's smile tightened. HR said culture fit. Someone called Marcus a little intense, like telling the truth was a personality flaw. I tried one more time. "If how we operate means pretending everything is fine until a client fires us, then we're picking the wrong person." Gary leaned forward, voice softer. "Let's keep this constructive." Constructive? Like I was being emotional and they were being professional. Dana summarized the room's consensus. Bryce got the role. Marcus got a polite rejection email by end of day. On the walk back, Dana stopped beside my desk and said quietly, "You need to be careful." "Careful about what?" I asked. Wanting the best person. Her expression didn't change. Careful about making leadership feel challenged. They don't like surprises. She said it like advice, like she was helping me. The next morning, everything was different in ways you can't screenshot. Emails I'd always been on stopped, including me. Meetings moved, and I found out after. My one-on-ones got rescheduled 3 weeks in a row. Bryce started asking me for status updates in front of people. He'd rephrase my ideas as his. Dana would nod along like this was the natural order. I kept delivering anyway. I fixed problems before they got visible. I told myself results would protect me. Results only protect you when the people above you want you protected. A month later, Dana finally put a one-on-one on my calendar. 30 minutes. No agenda. I walked into her office and saw HR sitting beside her with a folder on her lap and that careful, sympathetic face. Dana didn't look guilty. She looked relieved. And before anyone spoke, I understood something I'd never learned in any leadership training. Companies rarely start by firing you. They start by rewriting you. Dana folded her hands and said, "We've noticed some concerns around your collaboration and alignment." The HR meeting wasn't a firing, not yet. It was worse than that. They called it a development conversation. Dana did most of the talking. HR nodded at the right moments, and I sat there listening to a version of myself I barely recognized. Suddenly I was rigid, difficult, not collaborative enough. My habit of pushing back on bad timelines was now framed as negativity. My insistence on clear ownership was labeled control issues. I asked for examples. HR flipped open the folder and read from notes that sounded suspiciously like paraphrased Slack messages I'd sent months earlier. Messages where I'd said things like, "We can't promise that without adding headcount," or "This scope change needs client sign-off." Facts, repackaged as attitude. Dana leaned in and said, "We just want to make sure you're aligned with where leadership is taking the team." That phrase again. Leadership, as if it were a direction of travel I'd missed, rather than a shield. They put me on a performance improvement plan. 60 days, vague goals, no measurable outcomes, lots of language about tone, influence, and trust. I signed it because that's what you do when you still believe the system works if you play along. For the next few weeks, I played the cleanest game of my life. I documented everything. Follow-up emails, meeting summaries, decisions confirmed in writing. I looped Dana in on things she'd explicitly told me not to worry about, just so no one could say I'd gone rogue. It didn't matter. Bryce started bypassing me entirely. He'd change priorities without telling my team, then ask why deliverables were late. Dana would forward his emails with a single line, "Please address." Once, during a leadership sync, Bryce joked, "Some people here are more focused on being right than being team players." Everyone laughed. Dana didn't look at me. I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger yet. Something colder. I realized I wasn't being evaluated. I was being managed out. But that was just the beginning. Halfway through the PIP, Dana added a new requirement. Visibility, she called it. She wanted me to present weekly updates directly to the VPs, not on progress, on alignment. How I was embracing leadership direction. I knew what that was. A trap. In the first update, I stuck to facts. Risks. Dependencies. What we needed to succeed. Gary cut me off. "Let's keep this high level," he said, smiling. "We don't need to get into weeds." The weeds were where reality lived. I nodded anyway. After the meeting, Dana messaged me. "Try to read the room more." That night, I went back through my calendar. In 6 weeks, Dana had canceled every one-on-one we'd scheduled. HR hadn't checked in once. Bryce had been added to conversations he had no reason to be in. This wasn't about performance. It was about erasing me without having to say why. The micro-catharsis came quietly. One evening, around 9 p.m., I got an email from a client, angry, detailed, attaching screenshots of missed commitments. Commitments Bryce had promised without looping my team. I forwarded it to Dana and Bryce with a calm explanation and proposed fix. Dana replied all, "Let's discuss tomorrow. This tone isn't helpful." That was the moment I stopped trying to save them. I still did my job, but I stopped covering. When asked for estimates, I gave real ones. When clients complained, I documented the source. When Bryce overpromised, I confirmed scope changes in writing. 3 weeks before the PIP ended, HR scheduled another meeting. This one had an agenda. Dana said leadership felt I hadn't shown sufficient progress. HR used phrases like mutual fit and next chapter. They offered a severance package, modest, clean, conditional on a non-disparagement agreement. I asked if this was termination or resignation. HR smiled sadly. "We're giving you the opportunity to choose how you exit." I took the paperwork home and didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because something inside me finally clicked into place. They weren't punishing me for backing Marcus. They were warning everyone else what happens when you do. The next morning, I declined the severance and resigned instead. Gave 2 weeks. Clean handoff. No drama. Dana looked surprised. Maybe she thought I'd beg or negotiate. On my last day, my team took me for coffee. One of them said quietly, "This place is going to regret this." I smiled and said nothing. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. When I walked out of Larkwell, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd won, because I'd stopped pretending. I didn't disappear after I left. I just stopped being visible to them. For the first 2 months, nothing dramatic happened. Larkwell kept running. Bryce posted upbeat updates. Dana liked them. On LinkedIn, it looked like momentum. Behind the scenes, things were unraveling exactly the way Marcus had warned about in that interview. I landed at a smaller firm, less branding, more substance. Same industry, different posture. They asked me hard questions in the interview. They didn't flinch at honest answers. I took a slight pay cut and a cleaner title. It felt like starting over without lying to myself. About 6 months in, a former teammate texted me late one night. "You watching what's happening over here?" Larkwell had missed a major delivery. Not a slip. An implosion. A client escalated straight to the board. Turns out Bryce had committed to a timeline that assumed infinite resources and zero friction. When reality arrived, there was no buffer, no documentation trail that didn't lead back to him. Dana stepped in, tried to contain it, pushed teams harder, promised fixes she couldn't enforce, burned through goodwill she didn't realize was finite. People started leaving. Quietly at first, then faster. But that was just the beginning. A year later, I heard Larkwell was being strategically evaluated. That's corporate for bleeding cash while pretending it's optional. Leadership brought in consultants, then advisors, then bankers. They didn't call me, not once, which told me everything I needed to know about how badly they'd painted my exit. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen since that interview panel. Marcus. "Hey," his message read. "Long time. You free for a call?" We spoke that evening. His voice sounded the same, calm, precise. He told me he'd gone somewhere else after Larkwell, led a turnaround, built a reputation for walking into chaos without theatrics. Then he said, "My firm just acquired Larkwell's largest client portfolio." I didn't say anything. He continued, "Part of the deal involves operational oversight, temporary at first." Temporary, the word hung there. "They're restructuring leadership," he said. "Hard." I asked why he was telling me this. He paused, just long enough to mean something. Because when they asked who had tried to prevent this, years ago, your name came up. Not from them. From the paper trail. That night, I sat with that longer than I expected. Not satisfaction, something steadier. Over the next few months, I watched from a distance as things shifted, subtly then unmistakably. Dana was moved laterally, no direct reports. A role created just for her. Bryce stayed, but his authority narrowed. Decision-making required approvals. Reviews got specific. Metrics replaced vibes. Marcus didn't come in like a wrecking ball. He did audits, listened, asked for documentation, compared promises to outcomes. Every conversation led back to something written, time-stamped, owned. The same behaviors that had gotten me labeled difficult suddenly became the standard. One morning, a former coworker emailed me. Bryce resigned. No announcement, no farewell post, just gone. Dana followed 2 weeks later, pursuing new opportunities, according to LinkedIn. Comments turned off. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. Marcus and I met once, quietly, when he was in town. Coffee, no speeches. He told me he remembered that meeting, the way I'd spoken up when it would have been easier to nod along. I didn't need rescuing, he said, but I noticed who tried. He offered me a role, senior, clean mandate, reporting line that actually made sense. I thanked him, and surprised myself by saying no, not because I was bitter, because I'd built something else. Something that didn't require returning to a place that only understood you once it was too late. He nodded, like he expected that. When I left, I felt something settle. Not triumph, not revenge. Clarity. Larkwell didn't fall because of me. It fell because it punished honesty and rewarded comfort. All I did was refuse to stay quiet. And sometimes that's enough to let the rest unfold on its own. By the time Larkwell finished restructuring, it barely resembled the place I'd left. Not because the logo changed or the mission statement got rewritten. Those things always stay. What changed was the silence, the kind that settles after people stop pretending. Marcus didn't announce victories. He didn't send company-wide emails about culture. He just enforced reality. Projects were scoped properly or not approved. Commitments had owners. Missed targets came with consequences instead of excuses. People adjusted, or they didn't. 6 months into his oversight, Larkwell's reputation quietly stabilized. Clients stopped escalating. Teams stopped burning out. The same executives who once talked about alignment now talked about documentation and risk controls, like they'd invented the concepts. I watched all of this from a distance, not out of spite, out of curiosity. I wanted to see if the place could change once it was forced to live with the truth. It could, but only after it lost the people who had built careers on avoiding it. Marcus and I stayed in touch, sparingly. No strategy sessions, no postmortems, just occasional updates. Once he told me Dana had asked for a reference. He declined, not harshly, just truthfully. She wasn't ready to hear it, he said. That was the last I heard of her. As for Bryce, his exit was quieter than his rise. No redemption arc, no comeback story. He landed somewhere else, according to LinkedIn, in a role with a lot of words and very little accountability, which in a way felt appropriate. A year after I'd left Larkwell, Marcus invited me to lunch. Same city, same calm energy. I owe you clarity, he said. He told me that when the acquisition happened, leadership had tried to frame the past in convenient ways. They described me as talented but misaligned, as someone who struggled with influence. The usual. Marcus asked one question. Do you have proof? They didn't. What they did have was a paper trail. Emails, risk notes, meeting summaries. Everything I'd documented during my PIP without knowing it would ever matter. It showed exactly who had warned them, when, and about what. Marcus slid his phone across the table and showed me a message from one of the VPs. We should have listened to him. Not an apology, not accountability, but enough. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt finished. I realized something then that took me years to understand. Closure doesn't come from watching people fall. It comes from no longer needing them to understand. I had built a career somewhere else, led teams who didn't confuse honesty with threat, who wanted friction early instead of disasters later. My confidence didn't come from titles anymore. It came from knowing I could walk away from the wrong room without doubting myself. Before we stood up, Marcus said, "You know, if you ever wanted..." I stopped him gently. "I know, and I appreciate it. He smiled, not disappointed, just respectful. We shook hands. This time it lasted exactly as long as it needed to. I never posted about Larkwell, never subtweeted, never told the story publicly until now. Not because I was afraid, but because the story wasn't about revenge. It was about a choice, backing the right person when it costs you something, refusing to become smaller to make leadership comfortable. Leaving before bitterness teaches you the wrong lessons. Years later, when they met him as their boss, I wasn't in the room, and that was the most satisfying part, because by then I didn't need to be.